Hey guys, welcome to our first Ed Puzzle video on Greek civilization. So really this is a continuation of what we talked about in our last unit, except this time we're going to look at really the way of life around the Greeks during this time frame and some of like the big ideas that they invented or thought up that we still use today. And at the end of the unit we're going to figure out what happened to Greece and Alexander the Great and really how this shifts then into our Rome unit, which is coming next. So if we look at Greek civilization, some of the things that we already know is that in Greece, we know that they had a lot of city-states, but we also know that a lot of these city-states were very independent and very separated from one another, which led to all the conflict that they had that we talked about in our last unit, especially like in that last part between the war between the city-states of Athens and Sparta. So while they're really independent, the one thing that did unite them as a culture, as a civilization, was the things that they believed in. So if we look at this idea of culture, all areas have culture, and culture revolves around things like religion and language, different traditions that all of them shared, and so on. Okay, so if we look at the definition of culture, we can see it here. It's like their attitude, their customs, beliefs that really sets Greece apart from, let's say, Persia. And Greece apart from, like the European nations and so forth. So if we look at some of these cultural items that united the Greek city-states, a lot of it revolves around their religion. And then we get into things like dramas and plays and scientific discoveries and so on. So the first thing we're going to look at is mythology, and we'll actually spend some more time on mythology with some of our assignments, and we're going to have a project that deals with the Greek gods and goddesses and so on, because a lot of kids like mythology, but we can't do a whole unit on mythology. So if we look at mythology, this is going to be their religion. Okay, so their religion is going to center around this idea of a myth. Okay, so myths are going to be stories about gods, goddesses, and heroes. So they don't have one god that they believe in, they have multiple gods and goddesses. Heroes were a big part of their religion as well. So if we look at like the hero of Hercules, that was a big part of it. So the key thing about a myth is that it's going to have a lot of real things in it, right? But there's also a lot of false, okay? Things that just wouldn't happen. We believe that they probably wouldn't happen in everyday life. Okay, so if we look at these gods and goddesses, a lot of students are pretty familiar with the main gods and goddesses. So if we look at these gods and goddesses, they had different powers and characteristics, but they were not considered the all-powerful. So if we look at the monotheistic religions and we have this centered idea about God, and God created like the earth and creates this belief that when you die, you're judged and so on. In mythology, these gods and goddesses had a lot of human characteristics, which is very different than the monotheistic religions. So all of them had like these skills, but they looked and they acted like humans. So for example, a lot of these guys, they would get married, they'd have kids, they play tricks on one another, some of them are related, and so on. Very different from the monotheistic religions that a lot of us are familiar with today. So if we look at the mythology, okay, there are 12 gods that are considered the most important. So there's hundreds of gods and goddesses that are in these myths, okay, but 12 are kind of set aside as the most important gods of the religion. All these gods were believed to live in one place called Mount Olympus. So Mount Olympus is a real place. It's a mountain. It's the highest mountain in Greece. And the Greeks believed in ancient times that these 12 gods lived on the top of Mount Olympus, so high and so up in the clouds that if any person, average human being, would go up there, they would never be able to live to get to the top. Okay, so that's why people never really found Mount Olympus. It's a belief system. Okay, so in Greek mythology, these gods could come and go from Mount Olympus down to earth in different forms, but any human being would be stopped from entering the sacred place of Mount Olympus. So if we look at these main gods, Zeus is going to be considered the king of the Olympian gods. So he's going to be considered kind of like the leader of these gods. Athena was considered the goddess of wisdom and crafts, and we'll look at a few myths with her in our project and in some of our assignments. Apollo was worshipped as the god of sun and poetry. Aphrodite was the goddess of love. Ares, the god of war. Poseidon was the god of seas and earthquakes. These are typically the ones that most students are somewhat familiar with, which is why we focus a little bit more on these. So if we look at some of the pictures, we can notice that most of them have these human-like characteristics. Okay, in Greek mythology, what they did was that these gods and goddesses and heroes all look like human beings, but they're going to represent like the best side. So if we notice that all the males, okay, are very strong, they have a six-pack, they have muscles, they're relatively good-looking. Women are going to be the same thing, so they're going to look very beautiful. They have all the feminine characteristics that we tend to think make a woman beautiful. So the gods and goddesses in Greek mythology were set out to look like the perfect human being, okay, along with the powers that they held. In a lot of these pictures, we can see that they're holding like what they have as power. You know, we have Zeus with his lightning bolt and Poseidon with his Triton and so on. So if we look at these, Zeus is going to be worshipped by all Greeks, okay? And he's going to be considered that king. So all Greeks are going to set him kind of on the top of the pedestal. Each city-state then chose a god or a goddess to represent them as their protectors. So if we think about Athens, Athens looked at Athena as their protector, hence where the names come from. Okay, so in order to win the favor of their god, people would perform different rituals in order to please the gods. Remember, we said that at this time, people believed that if the gods were pleased, everything in human life would be really good. However, if they upset the gods in any ways, the gods would cast down wrath and send a disease or a plague or kill their crops and so forth. And they would believe that it's not because of scientific nature that happened, but rather because the gods were upset. So if we look at rituals, all religions have rituals. So if you're Christian or Catholic or Lutheran, there are certain rituals that we do that are in our religion. Certain things that you do, like when you go to church, during a mass, and so on. Mythology had the same thing. Okay, a lot of their rituals went around like different offerings that they would offer the gods, different prayers that they would do, and so on. Okay, in return, they would believe that the god would then be pleased and they would do good things for the people. Okay, they also had different festivals and feast celebrations. They did do sacrifices at this time in the city-states to please these gods. Okay, so this was a huge part of Greek life. Okay, a lot of their everyday life focused around their religion, very similar to many people in today's world. Okay, one item that they did in Greece was that every 4 years they would invite all athletes to come, and they had a festival held in the honor for Zeus. Okay, Zeus is the king, so they decided that every 4 years that these athletes would show, okay, how dedicated they were to the king of the gods. Okay, so these games were held for the greater glory of Zeus. Okay, and we know these games today because we call them the Olympics. So every 4 years, these games would take place in Olympia. Okay, and athletes from all around Greece would come and take part. Okay, so if we look at the current day Olympics, okay, it's the same thing. They're held every 4 years, okay, whether they're summer or winter, okay, and athletes from around the world, you know, show their strengths in different ways. And it was the same thing in ancient Greece. Okay, so if we look at the Olympics, the first games were held in 776 BC. Okay, the first modern Olympics, kind of more of what we know today, were also held in Athens in 1896. Okay, and today we still have the Olympics every 4 years. Okay, so they believed in ancient Greece that the gods would be very happy if people were able to show their skills in different ways. They had the arts, they had athletics, but they also had like war strategies and so on. The Olympics of ancient Greece look very different than what we have today. Now, another thing that focused on Greek mythology was something that we call the oracles. So the oracles would let people know, okay, different things that was going to happen in their lifetime. So they believed that these gods and goddesses played a really significant role in their everyday life. Okay, and everybody had this predetermined destiny or fate. So a person was born and their destiny was already created for them. Okay, some people in today's world still believe this as well. Okay, so these destinies and fates mean that certain events were going to happen in this person's lifetime no matter what. So no matter what road they took or what job they had, certain events would always happen. That's considered your destiny. Okay, so they believed that there were people in Greece that would be able to predict what was going to happen. They had a prophecy and so forth. A lot of these people were given the job of a priest or a priestess, and they would work in something called an oracle. Okay, so they believed that these gods would give that priest and priestess a prophecy of certain people to warn them about their future. And that would give them time to change things to help with their prophecy. So in order to find out about their future, ancient Greeks, what they would do is go and visit the oracle. So oracles are all around ancient Greece. So there's not just one oracle that they would attend. But in this oracle, the oracle was like a sacred shrine that people would visit, and the priest or the priestess would be there. And this priest and priestess would speak for the god. So through them, the god would speak, and then that person would then tell the ancient Greek citizen, okay, about what was going to happen in their future. One of the best known oracles in ancient Greece was one that was called the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Okay, and we can still visit this today. We can see the ruins that are located there. Okay, so in the oracle chamber, it was actually deep inside of the temple, so it wasn't there on the top. They actually have to go in and then go down inside of this temple. Okay, now there was a crack in the floor which would let out this volcanic steam, which made it, look and feel, very real. The priest or the priestess is sitting there, it's steamy, they're speaking for the gods and telling the prophecy of what was going to happen. Okay, so the priest and the priestess, what they would do is listen to the person's question about their life, about what's going to happen, and they're going to answer. They're going to try to tell the person what is their prophecy. Now, the key thing about the priest and the priestess is that they would listen to these questions, but they're going to answer them in a riddle. Okay, so they're going to kind of give a riddle back to a person. We might say, well, why would they do that? Why answer in a riddle? Okay, if you think about a riddle is interpreted. So the person's going to take this back and they're going to interpret the meaning of it. Okay, since the person is interpreting the meaning, okay, the priest and the priestess could never be wrong. Okay, if the prophecy didn't turn out the way the person thought it would, it was because the person's interpretation was incorrect. Not the priest and priestess was incorrect, but the person who was thinking about the meaning was. Okay, so if we look at who visited the oracle, everybody visited the oracle. So average ancient Greece people, along with leaders and kings, advisors, and they're going to base their decisions on what was told to them in the oracle. This is a huge part of their life. And we're going to stop here for today because I'm at 12 minutes. So we'll see you again in the next video.